My son told me I was too old to make my own decisions, so I moved $9.5 million where he'll never find it. The words still echo in my mind like a prayer I never thought I'd have to say. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. And if you, for even a second, feel like this sounds familiar, just please leave a like and subscribe. It'll help me keep sharing these stories that need to be heard. My name is Margaret Eleanor Hayes, and for 73 years I believed that growing old meant earning respect. That after decades of sacrifice, sleepless nights spent worrying about everyone but myself, birthdays celebrated in quiet corners so others could shine brighter, I'd be granted some quiet dignity. I never expected applause or grand gestures. I just hoped to be remembered. As a mother, as a woman, as someone who mattered beyond the meals I cooked and the bills I paid. But life has this cruel way of showing you exactly who you are to the people you love most. Sometimes, you discover you're just a signature away from being erased completely. It started on a Tuesday morning in October, the kind of crisp Chicago day when the leaves crunch under your feet and the air smells like promises. I was in my kitchen on Maple Street, the same kitchen where I'd made pancakes every Saturday for 35 years, where I'd bandaged scraped knees and celebrated report cards. The morning light streamed through curtains I'd sewn myself, casting golden rectangles across the oak table my late husband Robert had built with his own hands. I was organizing my weekly pill container, the plastic compartments labeled Monday through Sunday like a countdown I'd grown to dread, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Owen, my only son, my everything, the boy I'd carried for 9 months and carried in my heart for 48 years. His voice was quick, almost breathless, with that tone he used when he was trying to sound casual about something important. "Mom, I need to talk to you about something. Can I come over this afternoon?" There was something different in his voice. Not the warmth I remembered from childhood phone calls when he'd ramble about school friends and weekend plans. This was the voice he used with clients at his financial planning firm, professional and measured. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, already mentally planning what I'd cook for lunch. "I'll make your favorite pot roast." "Actually, Mom, don't worry about cooking. This won't take long. Won't take long." The phrase sat heavy in my chest like a stone I couldn't swallow. After we hung up, I found myself standing in the middle of my living room, surrounded by 43 years of memories. Family photos covered every surface. Owen's kindergarten graduation, his high school football team, his college commencement where he'd hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, wedding photos from happier times, when Robert was still alive, and our house was full of laughter instead of silence. The mantelpiece held Owen's baby shoes, bronzed and gleaming, next to the Father's Day card he'd made in 2nd grade that read, "My dad is the best," in crayon letters I'd treasured more than jewelry. But there were no Mother's Day cards displayed. I'd kept them all, of course, stored carefully in a shoebox upstairs, but somehow they'd never seemed important enough for public display. I picked up my favorite photograph, Owen at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, his arms wrapped around my neck after I'd surprised him at school with homemade cookies for his class party. I remembered how his teacher had pulled me aside that day to tell me how proud Owen was of me, how he'd bragged to his classmates that his mom made the best chocolate chip cookies in the world. When had he stopped being proud of me? At exactly 2 o'clock, Owen's silver BMW pulled into my driveway. I watched from the window as he sat in the car for a moment, checking his phone, his expression serious and distant. He was wearing the navy suit I'd helped him pick out for his promotion last year, the one that made him look so much like his father that it sometimes took my breath away. But when he walked up the front steps, there was no familiar smile, no kiss on my cheek, no, "How are you feeling, Mom?" Instead, he carried a leather briefcase and wore the expression of someone conducting business. "Hi, Mom." He hugged me briefly, the kind of polite embrace you'd give an acquaintance. "Thanks for making time." Making time. As if I had anywhere else to be. As if my calendar was packed with social engagements and important meetings instead of doctor's appointments and grocery shopping. We sat at the kitchen table, and I offered him coffee, tea, the leftover apple pie I'd made, hoping he might visit. He declined everything, instead opening his briefcase and pulling out a stack of official-looking documents. "Mom, I've been thinking about your situation," he began, his tone gentle but somehow patronizing, like he was explaining something complicated to a child. You're living alone in this big house, managing all these finances by yourself. It's a lot of responsibility for someone your age. Someone your age. The phrase hit me like a slap. When had I become someone my age instead of just mom? I'm fine, Owen, I said quietly, my hands wrapped around my coffee mug for warmth. I've been managing just fine. He smiled then, but it wasn't the smile I remembered from childhood. This was patient, condescending. The smile he probably used with elderly clients who didn't understand compound interest. I know you think you are, Mom, but things are getting more complicated. Technology, investment strategies, healthcare decisions. I see clients your age struggling with these issues every day. He slid the papers across the table toward me. I've drawn up some documents that would make things easier for both of us. Power of attorney, financial guardianship. Just in case something happens to you. Just in case something happens. The words hung in the air between us like a threat disguised as concern. I stared at those papers for what felt like an eternity. The legal language swimming before my eyes like alphabet soup. Power of attorney, financial guardianship. Words that sounded helpful but felt like shackles. I need to think about this, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Owen's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mom, there's really nothing to think about. It's just a safety net. Standard stuff that every responsible family does. Every responsible family. The implication was clear. If I hesitated, I wasn't being responsible. I was being difficult. After he left, taking his briefcase and his cold efficiency with him, I sat alone in my kitchen as the afternoon light faded into evening. The house felt enormous around me, filled with the echoes of conversations that used to matter, laughter that used to come easily. I found myself walking through each room like a ghost visiting her own life, touching furniture and photographs that told the story of decades spent giving everything I had to the people I loved. In the hallway, I paused at the wall of school photos. Owen's progression from kindergarten through high school graduation, each year marked by my careful notation on the back. Owen, age 6, first grade, so proud of my smart boy. But tonight, those photos looked different. Tonight, they looked like evidence. Evidence of a mother who had poured her entire identity into raising a son who now saw her as a problem to be managed. The memories came flooding back, each one sharp and vivid, like scenes from a movie I'd watched too many times but never understood the ending to. I remembered Owen's senior year of high school, when he'd been accepted to Northwestern University. But the financial aid package wasn't enough. Robert had been gone for 2 years by then, leaving me with a modest teacher's pension and the small life insurance policy that barely covered the mortgage. Mom, I have to go to Northwestern, Owen had said, his 17-year-old eyes bright with dreams and desperation. It's the only school with the business program I need. The connections there will set me up for life. I'd looked at the tuition bill, $68,000 a year, and felt my heart sink. But when I looked at my son, saw the hope in his face, I knew I'd find a way. I took a second mortgage on the house, cashed in my small retirement account, paying the penalties without a second thought, sold my mother's antique jewelry, pieces that had been in our family for 3 generations. I even sold Robert's vintage car, the 1967 Mustang he'd restored in our garage, spending every weekend for 5 years bringing it back to life. Owen had hugged me that day, tears in his eyes. Mom, I'll pay you back. I promise. Once I graduate and get a good job, I'll take care of everything. But graduation came and went. Owen landed a position at a prestigious financial firm in downtown Chicago, started earning more money than I'd ever seen in my life. He bought himself a luxury apartment in Lincoln Park, a BMW, expensive suits that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. The house payments? Still my responsibility. The second mortgage I'd taken out for his education? Still being paid from my teacher's pension. When I gently mentioned it once, during one of his increasingly rare visits, Owen had looked genuinely confused. Mom, that was an investment in my future. In our family's future. You can't put a price on education. Our family's future. But somehow, that future only seemed to benefit him. Then there was the incident with his first apartment. Owen had called me in tears. something that should have alarmed me more than it did, explaining that his security deposit had fallen through at the last minute. The landlord was threatening to give the apartment to someone else. "It's only $5,000, Mom. I just need it until my first paycheck comes in. 2 weeks? Tops." I'd driven to the bank that same afternoon, withdrawn $5,000 from my emergency fund, money I'd been saving for years in case my old furnace finally gave out or my car needed major repairs. 2 weeks became 2 months, became never. When I finally asked about it, Owen seemed genuinely hurt that I'd brought it up. "Mom, I thought that was a gift. I mean, you're my mother. Isn't that what family does for each other?" What family does for each other. But it only seemed to flow one direction. The pattern continued for years. Wedding expenses when Owen married Lisa the first time. A lavish affair at the Drake Hotel that cost more than most people's annual salary. I'd contributed $15,000 because the bride's family shouldn't have to pay for everything, Mom. The divorce lawyer fees when that marriage fell apart 2 years later. I can't ask my friends for money, Mom. You understand. The down payment on his current house when he married Lauren. It's an investment in real estate, Mom. You're helping me build wealth. Each time, Owen had a perfectly reasonable explanation. Each time, I'd felt selfish for even questioning it. Each time, I'd written the check and told myself this was what mothers did. They sacrificed for their children's success. But tonight, sitting in my empty house with those power of attorney papers on my kitchen table, a different word came to mind. Used. Had I been used? The thought was so foreign, so painful that I tried to push it away. But it clung to me like smoke, seeping into every memory, every interaction, every time Owen had called with urgency in his voice and a solution that required my money. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, my knees protesting with each step. The arthritis was getting worse. Another reminder of my advancing age. Another reason Owen probably thought I needed managing. In my closet, behind the winter coats I rarely wore anymore, was a small fireproof safe that Robert had installed years ago. Inside were our important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, insurance policies, and something else I'd almost forgotten about. Robert's final letter to me. I'd found it after his funeral, tucked inside his desk drawer with my name written on the envelope in his careful handwriting. The letter that had revealed a secret he'd kept for our entire marriage. A secret he'd saved for the moment when I'd need it most. My hands shook as I pulled out the envelope, the paper yellow with age. Inside, Robert's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably feeling more alone than you've ever felt in your life. I'm so sorry I can't be there to hold your hand through whatever comes next. But I need you to know something. Something I never told you because I didn't want you to worry. Didn't want you to feel like you had to change how you lived your generous, beautiful life. I've been investing for years. Quietly. Carefully. Money from my contracting business that I never touched. Savings that I put away every month without fail. I wanted to make sure that no matter what happened to me, you'd never have to depend on anyone. You'd never have to ask for help. Check safety deposit box 247 at First National Bank. The key is taped under the bottom drawer of my desk. You're going to be surprised by what's there. More than surprised. Don't tell Owen. Not yet. Not until you're sure he sees you as his mother, not as his inheritance. I love you, Maggie. I always did. I always will. You're Robert." I'd read that letter 5 years ago, right after Robert's funeral, when grief had made it impossible to think clearly about anything. I'd gone to the bank, opened the safety deposit box, and discovered assets I never knew existed. Bonds, stocks, real estate investments, bank accounts in my name that Robert had been quietly funding for decades. $9.5 million. Hidden away. Protected. Waiting for the moment when I'd need the strength that only financial independence could provide. And I'd never touched a penny of it. Instead, I'd continued living on my modest teacher's pension, continued writing checks to Owen whenever he needed them, continued believing that being a good mother meant giving until it hurt. But maybe Robert had known something I was only beginning to understand. Maybe he'd known that love without boundaries isn't love at all. It's just another word for being used. The next morning, I woke up with Robert's letter still clutched in my hand. My cheek creased from sleeping on the kitchen table. The power of attorney documents lay scattered beside my cold coffee cup like accusations I wasn't ready to face. I tried to convince myself that Owen's visit had been about genuine concern, that maybe I was reading too much into his businesslike demeanor. His impatience when I'd asked for time to think. Maybe grief and loneliness were making me paranoid. But as the days passed, a pattern began to emerge that I'd been blind to for years. Owen called the next afternoon. "No, how are you feeling, Mom? No, did you sleep well? Just, have you had a chance to look over those documents?" "I'm still considering them," I said carefully. A pause. Then, "Mom, you're overthinking this. It's really just paperwork. Everyone does it. Everyone does it. But not everyone had a son who spoke to them like they were a client, instead of the woman who had given birth to them." 3 days later, Owen called again. This time, Lauren was with him. I could hear her voice in the background, sharp and impatient. "Mom, we need to get this settled. Lauren and I are meeting with our financial advisor tomorrow, and it would be easier if we could include your assets in our overall family planning." Our overall family planning. When had my money become part of their portfolio? "I haven't decided yet, Owen." "Decided what?" "Mom, there's nothing to decide. You're making this complicated for no reason." The dismissal in his voice was like a slap. I hung up feeling smaller than I had in years. But it was the following week that truly opened my eyes. I'd been having chest pains. Nothing dramatic, just a tightness that came and went, probably stress-related. But at 73, you don't ignore chest pains. I called Owen from the emergency room, expecting concern, maybe even a rushed visit. "Emergency room?" His voice carried more annoyance than worry. "Mom, you can't just go to the ER every time you feel a little discomfort. Do you know how expensive that is?" I sat in that sterile hospital bed, wearing a gown that barely covered me, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the antiseptic smell of fear, and my son was worried about the cost. "The tests came back normal," I said quietly. "Just stress, the doctor thinks." "Well, that's good. Listen, Mom, maybe this is a sign that you need more support. Someone to help you make better decisions about when to seek medical care. Someone who understands insurance and healthcare costs. Someone like him," he meant. "Someone with power of attorney." "I have to go," I whispered, my throat tight with unshed tears. "The nurse needs to check my IV." "Okay, feel better. And Mom, maybe think about what I said." He hung up without saying he loved me. I sat in that hospital bed for 6 more hours, waiting for discharge papers, waiting for my test results, waiting for someone to call and ask if I needed a ride home. No one called. I took a taxi home from the hospital, $53 I couldn't really afford, and found my mailbox overflowing with 3 days' worth of mail that Owen could have easily collected for me. He lived 20 minutes away, but the real revelation came 2 weeks later. I was grocery shopping at the Jewel Osco on Lincoln Avenue, moving slowly through the aisles with my cart, when I heard familiar laughter from the next aisle over. Owen's laugh, the one I used to love hearing from his childhood bedroom when he was on the phone with friends. I turned the corner, a smile already forming on my face, ready to surprise him. But Owen wasn't alone. He was with Lauren and another couple I didn't recognize, their cart filled with expensive cuts of meat, imported cheeses, bottles of wine that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "The house is worth at least $800,000, Owen was saying to the other man, his voice casual, conversational. "Probably more in this market. Prime location, fully paid off. And that's just the beginning." My blood turned to ice water in my veins. "Really?" the other man asked. "Your mom's place?" "Yeah. Mom doesn't really understand real estate values. She has no idea what she's sitting on. The property alone, plus whatever Dad left her." Owen shrugged. "Let's just say I won't be working past 55. Lauren laughed, the sound sharp and cold. Thank God. I was starting to worry we'd be stuck supporting her for years. Supporting me. As if the woman who had funded their wedding, their house down payment, their entire lifestyle was somehow a burden they were carrying. "The power of attorney should make everything smoother," Owen continued. "Once we have that in place, we can start making some real decisions about her future. Her future. Not my future. Her future. As if I was a problem to be solved rather than a person with my own wishes and desires. I stood frozen in the cereal aisle, my hands gripping my cart so tightly my knuckles went white. They were discussing my life, my home, my death, like investors reviewing a portfolio. The other woman, someone I'd never met, leaned closer to Lauren. "What if she doesn't want to sign?" "She will," Lauren said confidently. "Owen's working on her. She feels guilty about everything he's spent on her over the years. She knows she owes him, for the money I had given him, for the sacrifices I had made. Somehow, in their version of reality, I was the debtor. I backed away quietly, abandoning my cart in the aisle, and walked out of that store on legs that felt like water. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, hands shaking, trying to process what I'd just heard. Owen wasn't trying to help me. He was positioning himself to inherit while I was still alive to sign the papers. Lauren wasn't worried about my well-being. She was worried about me living too long and eating into their inheritance. And I had been the willing participant in my own financial manipulation for years. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Robert's funeral. I poured myself a glass of wine, a cheap bottle I'd been saving for some special occasion that never seemed to come, and I sat in Robert's old recliner and let myself cry. Not the polite, quiet tears I'd shed in hospital beds and empty grocery store parking lots. Real crying, the kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest and empties you out completely. I cried for the mother I'd been, who had loved so completely that she'd made herself vulnerable to being used. I cried for the woman I'd become, isolated and diminished and treated like a burden by the only family she had left. But most of all, I cried for the years I'd wasted believing that giving everything to someone was the same thing as being loved by them. When the tears finally stopped, something else took their place. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind that burns itself out quickly. This was cold, calculated anger. The anger of a woman who had finally seen clearly and didn't like what she was looking at. I walked upstairs to my bedroom, pulled out Robert's letter again, and read it one more time. "Don't tell Owen. Not yet. Not until you're sure he sees you as his mother, not as his inheritance." Now I was sure. Owen saw me as $9.5 million that happened to be wrapped in the inconvenient package of an aging woman who might live longer than he wanted to wait. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I'd memorized but never called. "Rachel Morrison, attorney at law." The voice answered professionally. "Rachel, this is Margaret Hayes. We went to high school together. I need help. Legal help." "Margaret, of course I remember you. What's going on?" I paused, the words still feeling foreign in my mouth. "I think my son is trying to steal from me." The silence on the other end of the line wasn't shock. It was recognition. "How soon can you come in?" Rachel asked gently. "Tomorrow," I said without hesitation. "I've waited long enough." As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror. For the first time in months, the woman looking back at me didn't look like a victim. She looked like someone who was done being used. Rachel Morrison's law office was nothing like I'd expected. Instead of intimidating mahogany and leather, it was warm and welcoming, with soft lighting and photographs of her grandchildren scattered across her desk. She'd aged gracefully since our high school days, her silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, her eyes still sharp with the intelligence that had made her valedictorian 45 years ago. "Tell me everything," she said, pouring us both coffee from a thermal carafe. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." For the next 2 hours, I laid out the whole sordid story, the years of financial requests, the power of attorney documents, the conversation I'd overheard at the grocery store. Rachel took notes, her expression growing more serious with each detail. "Margaret," she said finally, setting down her pen, "what your son is attempting is called financial elder abuse. It's more common than you'd think, and sadly it's often perpetrated by family members who feel entitled to their elderly relatives' assets. Financial elder abuse, the clinical term made it sound less personal, less devastating, but somehow, having a name for it made it real. "What can I do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "First, we secure your assets. All of them. We create trusts, establish safeguards, make sure no one can access your money without your explicit consent. Then we wait and see how your son reacts to being told no." Rachel was right about one thing. I didn't have to wait long for Owen's reaction. 2 days after my meeting with Rachel, my phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. Owen's voice was tight with barely controlled frustration. "Mom, I heard you went to see a lawyer. What's that about?" I'd been expecting this call, but my heart still hammered in my chest. "I'm just making sure my affairs are in order, Owen. You said yourself that I needed to be more responsible about these things. You didn't need to involve strangers in our family business. If you had questions about the documents, you should have asked me. I'm a financial planner, Mom. This is literally what I do for a living. Our family business." But somehow, Owen was the only one who got to make decisions about it. "I've decided not to sign the power of attorney," I said, the words coming out steadier than I'd expected. The silence that followed was deafening. "What do you mean you've decided not to sign?" "I mean exactly that. I'm not signing those documents." "Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You need someone to help you manage. I'm managing just fine." "No, you're not." The mask of patience finally slipped, revealing the anger underneath. "You went to the emergency room for stress. You can barely handle grocery shopping. You're living alone in a house that's too big for you, making decisions you don't understand about money you don't know how to manage." Each word was designed to diminish me, to make me doubt my own competence. "Owen," I said no. "This is ridiculous. I'm coming over. We need to discuss this like adults." He hung up before I could respond. An hour later, Owen's BMW pulled into my driveway with more force than necessary, gravel scattering under his tires. But he wasn't alone. Lauren sat in the passenger seat, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her expression grim with determination. They walked up my front steps like a delegation. Owen carrying his briefcase, Lauren clutching her designer purse like a weapon. "Mom, we need to talk," Owen said the moment I opened the door. No greeting, no hug, no pretense of familial warmth. Lauren pushed past me into the living room without being invited, her heels clicking against my hardwood floors with aggressive precision. She looked around my home like she was appraising its contents for auction. "Margaret," she said, her voice syrupy with false concern, "Owen and I are worried about you. Living alone at your age, making impulsive decisions like hiring lawyers. It's not healthy." Impulsive decisions. As if protecting myself from financial abuse was a sign of mental deterioration. "I appreciate your concern," I said carefully, "but I'm perfectly capable of making my own decisions." Lauren and Owen exchanged a look, the kind of wordless communication that married couples develop, loaded with meaning I wasn't supposed to understand. "Are you, though?" Lauren asked, settling herself on my sofa like she owned it. "Owen told me about the emergency room incident, about how you've been forgetting to pay bills on time." I hadn't forgotten to pay any bills. That was a complete fabrication. But Lauren delivered it with such confidence that for a moment I doubted myself. "My bills are current," I said firmly. "Mom, you missed your property tax payment last month," Owen said, pulling out his phone. "I had to call the county office myself to straighten it out." Another lie. I'd paid my property taxes in October, like I did every year. I had the canceled check to prove it. But Owen was counting on me not remembering, not keeping records, not being able to defend myself against their coordinated attack on my competence. "That's not true," I said. "Mom, denial isn't going to help anyone here," Owen said with the patience of someone explaining reality to a child. "Lauren and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it might be time to consider assisted living, somewhere with professional staff who can help you manage your medications, your finances, your daily activities." Assisted living. They wanted to institutionalize me so they could take control of everything I owned. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Lauren leaned forward, her expression shifting to one of practiced sympathy. "Margaret, I know this is hard to hear. My grandmother went through the same thing. The confusion, the paranoia, the inability to accept help. But we caught it early, and she was so much happier once she didn't have to worry about all those adult responsibilities anymore." Paranoia. They were calling my resistance to being robbed paranoia. "Owen," I said, looking directly at my son, "I want you and Lauren to leave. Now." For a moment, genuine surprise flashed across his face. I'd never asked him to leave before, never set a boundary, never said no with such finality. Mom, you're upset. Let's just calm down and get out. The words came from someplace deep inside me, from the part of myself I'd been burying under years of politeness and accommodation. Get out of my house. Owen's expression hardened. The pretense of concern evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. Fine, but we're not done with this conversation. And Mom, you might want to think about how this looks. A woman your age, living alone, making erratic decisions, turning against her own family. That's exactly the kind of behavior that courts look at when determining mental competency. The threat was clear. Sign the papers willingly, or they'd find another way to take control. Lauren stood, smoothing down her skirt with deliberate precision. We're only trying to help, Margaret. But if you're determined to make this difficult, well, there are other options. They walked toward the door, but Lauren paused in the hallway, studying the family photos that lined the walls. It's funny, she said conversationally, how people can live in the past instead of accepting reality, holding on to things that aren't really theirs anymore. She was talking about the house, about my life, about everything I'd built with Robert over 43 years of marriage. After they left, I stood in my empty living room, my hands shaking with adrenaline and rage. The house felt contaminated by their presence, their threats, their casual cruelty. But something else had happened during that confrontation, something unexpected. I'd found my voice. For the first time in years, I'd said no and meant it. I'd set a boundary and enforced it. I'd refused to be diminished, even when they tried their hardest to make me doubt my own sanity. That evening, my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hayes? This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Chicago Behavioral Health. I understand you've been having some difficulties with confusion and memory issues. Your son Owen contacted us about scheduling an evaluation. My blood ran cold. They were already implementing their backup plan. I haven't contacted any doctor, I said firmly, and I don't need an evaluation. I understand this can be frightening, Mrs. Hayes, but your family is concerned about your ability to make sound decisions. An evaluation would help everyone involved understand your current cognitive state. My cognitive state is fine. My son doesn't have permission to make medical appointments for me. Of course not. But given the concerns that have been raised, it might be wise to... I hung up. Within minutes, my phone rang again. Then my doorbell started ringing. I turned off my phone, closed my curtains, and sat in Robert's chair in the gathering darkness. They weren't going to stop. Owen and Lauren had made it clear that they viewed my resistance as a problem to be solved, not a boundary to be respected. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated me. I called Rachel from my landline, the old rotary phone Robert had insisted on keeping in the kitchen. They're escalating, I told her. Medical evaluations, threats about mental competency. They're not going to accept no for an answer. Then we don't give them a choice, Rachel said calmly. Tomorrow morning we implement everything. Trusts, medical directives, financial safeguards. We lock down every asset you have so tight that even if they somehow got guardianship, they'd still have to go through multiple attorneys and court orders to access a single penny. What if they try to have me declared incompetent? Margaret, I've known you for 50 years. You're one of the sharpest women I've ever met. Let them try. We'll be ready. As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the frightened, confused elderly person Owen and Lauren were trying to convince everyone I was. She was a 73-year-old woman who was done being used. And she was about to show them exactly what that meant. The next morning, I woke up before dawn for the first time in months. Not because of anxiety or insomnia, but because I had purpose. Real purpose. Beyond just surviving another day in a life that had become too small for me. I dressed carefully. Not in the comfortable old clothes I'd been wearing around the house, but in the navy blue suit I'd bought for Robert's funeral and hadn't touched since. The one that made me feel like the high school English teacher I'd been for 30 years. The woman who had commanded respect from teenagers and parents alike. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked into Rachel's office carrying a folder thick with financial documents I'd retrieved from Robert's safety deposit box the evening before. Bank statements, investment portfolios, property deeds, the full scope of assets that Owen had no idea existed. Rachel's eyes widened as she reviewed the paperwork. Margaret, this is substantial. Much more substantial than I expected. $9.7 million, I said quietly. Robert was a very careful man. And your son has no knowledge of these assets? None. He thinks I'm living on my teacher's pension and whatever small savings account Robert left me. He has no idea about the investments, the real estate holdings, the trust funds Robert set up. Rachel leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Well, this changes everything. Owen can scheme all he wants about your house and your modest savings, but he has no legal claim to assets he doesn't even know exist. Over the next 3 hours, we restructured everything, created irrevocable trusts that would protect the bulk of my assets from any future claims, established medical directives that specified exactly who could and couldn't make healthcare decisions on my behalf, set up financial safeguards that would require multiple attorneys and court orders to penetrate. Most importantly, we created what Rachel called a dignity clause, a legal provision that would automatically disinherit anyone who attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent without clear medical evidence of cognitive decline from doctors of my own choosing. If Owen tries to have you evaluated by friendly doctors or challenges your mental capacity in court, Rachel explained, he automatically loses any inheritance rights. Forever. By noon, I was legally bulletproof, but the real liberation came that afternoon, when I did something I hadn't done in over 20 years. I went shopping. Not grocery shopping or practical shopping for things I needed. Real shopping. For things I wanted. Things that would make me happy. I drove to Oakbrook Center, the upscale mall where I used to take Owen for back-to-school clothes when he was little. But instead of heading to the practical stores I'd always shopped at, Kohl's, JCPenney, the places where a teacher's salary could stretch to cover a growing boy's needs, I walked into Nordstrom. The saleswoman who approached me was about my daughter-in-law's age, impeccably dressed and professionally friendly. But when she looked at me, she didn't see a burden or a problem to be managed. She saw a customer. "Can I help you find something special today?" she asked. "I need a complete wardrobe," I heard myself saying. Everything. I've been wearing the same clothes for 10 years, and I'm tired of looking like someone who's given up on herself. For the next 2 hours, I tried on clothes I would never have considered before. A cashmere sweater in deep burgundy that made my gray hair look silver instead of dull. A pair of well-fitted jeans that actually flattered my 73-year-old figure instead of hiding it. A silk blouse in emerald green that brought out the color in my eyes. With each new outfit, I caught glimpses of myself in the dressing room mirrors. Not the tired, diminished woman I'd become, but the person I used to be. The person I could still be. "You look beautiful," the saleswoman said as I modeled an elegant black dress that would have been perfect for the kind of dinner parties Robert and I used to attend, back when we had a social life that extended beyond doctor's appointments and grocery runs. "I feel like myself again," I admitted. "Sometimes that's all it takes," she smiled. "A reminder that you're worth the investment." I bought everything. $600 worth of clothes that made me feel human again. Money that, in my old life, would have been earmarked for one of Owen's emergencies or requests. As I loaded my shopping bags into my car, my phone buzzed with a text message from Owen. "Mom, we need to talk. This lawyer thing is getting out of hand. Lauren and I are coming over tonight." For the first time in years, I texted back with complete honesty. "No, I'm busy." The response came immediately. Busy with what? I looked at my shopping bags, at my reflection in the car window showing a woman in a new cashmere sweater who looked like she mattered. "Living my life," I typed back, and turned off my phone. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since before Robert died. I cooked myself a real dinner. Not the simple, practical meals I'd been surviving on, but the kind of elaborate feast I used to prepare when we entertained friends. I went to Whole Foods and bought ingredients without looking at prices. Prime rib that cost $40. Money I would have given to Owen without a second thought, but had felt too guilty to spend on myself. Fresh asparagus, new potatoes, a bottle of wine that cost more than my usual weekly grocery budget. I set the dining room table with our good china, the Lenox pattern Robert had surprised me with for our 25th anniversary. I lit candles, put on classical music, poured myself a glass of wine, and sat down to eat like I was someone worth celebrating. The food tasted better than anything I'd eaten in months. Not because it was more expensive, but because I was eating it as a choice rather than mere sustenance. Because for the first time in years, I was nourishing myself instead of just keeping myself alive. Halfway through dinner, my doorbell rang. Then again. Then the pounding started. "Mom! I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway." Owen's voice, tight with frustration and anger. "Mom, open the door. We need to discuss this situation like adults." I took another sip of wine and cut another piece of perfectly cooked prime rib. "Margaret!" Lauren's voice now, sharp and demanding. "This is ridiculous. You can't just ignore us." Actually, I could. That was the revelation that hit me as I sat in my candlelit dining room, surrounded by the life I'd built with Robert, eating food I'd chosen because it pleased me. I could ignore them. I could say no. I could live my life according to my own priorities instead of theirs. The pounding continued for 10 more minutes, then stopped abruptly. I heard car doors slam, Owen's BMW pulling out of my driveway with unnecessary force. But I didn't move from my dining room table. I finished my dinner at my own pace, savoring each bite, each sip of wine, each moment of peace in my own home. Later that evening, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I called my old friend Betty Carlson, someone I'd lost touch with after Robert died because grief had made social connections feel impossible. "Margaret!" Betty's voice was warm with surprise and genuine pleasure. "Oh my goodness, it's been too long. How are you doing?" "I'm doing well," I said, and realized I meant it. "Actually, I'm doing better than I have in years." We talked for an hour. About her grandchildren, her volunteer work at the animal shelter, her recent trip to Ireland with her sister. Normal conversations about normal things, the kind of interactions I'd forgotten I was capable of having. "We should have lunch soon," Betty said before we hung up. "There's a lovely new place in Hinsdale I've been wanting to try." "I'd like that," I said. "I'd like that very much." After we hung up, I sat in Robert's chair and realized something profound had happened. For the first time since his death, I'd spent an entire day thinking about what I wanted instead of what other people expected from me. I'd made decisions based on my own desires rather than other people's demands. I'd said no to people who were trying to control me, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it had gotten better. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in months. No anxiety about Owen's disapproval, no guilt about spending money on myself, no fear about the future, just peace. The peace that comes from finally understanding that you don't owe anyone your happiness, your security, or your dignity, not even your son. When I woke up the next morning, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in years. A woman who liked herself, a woman who was worth protecting, a woman who was done apologizing for taking up space in her own life. I put on my new emerald green blouse, made myself coffee in my good china cup, and sat down to plan the rest of my liberation, because this was just the beginning. For 48 years, I'd been Owen's mother. Now I was going to remember how to be Margaret. And Margaret, it turned out, was someone worth getting to know. 3 days after I'd ignored Owen's pounding on my door, the legal papers arrived. A courier in a crisp uniform handed me an envelope with the gravity of someone delivering a death sentence. Inside, official documents from Patterson, Williams & Associates, Owen's law firm, apparently. Papers requesting a court-ordered mental competency evaluation, citing concerns about Mrs. Hayes's recent erratic behavior, financial decision-making capacity, and ability to live independently. Erratic behavior. That's what they were calling my refusal to be stolen from. But as I read through the legal language, something unexpected happened. Instead of fear, I felt something that could only be described as relief. Finally, Owen had dropped the pretense. No more fake concern, no more manipulation disguised as love. This was a declaration of war, and I preferred honest warfare to poisonous affection. I called Rachel immediately. "They're moving faster than I expected," she said after I read her the contents. "But Margaret, this might actually be good news. They're forcing this into open court, where they'll have to prove their claims instead of just making threats in your living room. What do I need to do? First, we're going to get you evaluated by Dr. Patricia Williams. She's a geriatric psychiatrist I've worked with before. Brilliant woman, completely ethical. She'll document your cognitive state professionally. Then we're going to file our own motion. Our own motion? To have Owen removed as your emergency contact and medical proxy. To establish that any future attempts to manipulate or financially abuse you will result in immediate restraining orders. We're going nuclear, Margaret. If they want a legal fight, we'll give them one they'll never forget. 2 days later, I sat in Dr. Williams's comfortable office, undergoing the most thorough mental evaluation of my life. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, psychological profiles. She asked about my recent decisions, my daily activities, my emotional state. Mrs. Hayes, she said finally, I'm going to be completely frank with you. You show absolutely no signs of cognitive decline, dementia, or mental incompetence. In fact, your recent decision to protect your assets from family manipulation shows excellent judgment and self-preservation instincts. She paused, studying her notes. What you're experiencing is called financial elder abuse, and your response to it has been entirely appropriate. Setting boundaries, seeking legal counsel, refusing to sign documents under pressure. These are all signs of mental clarity, not confusion. Then why do I feel like I'm going crazy sometimes? Because you've been systematically gaslit for years. When people constantly tell you that your perceptions are wrong, that your decisions are flawed, that you can't be trusted to manage your own life, it's natural to start doubting yourself. That's psychological manipulation, not mental illness. Her words felt like absolution. The court hearing was scheduled for the following Thursday. Rachel advised me to dress conservatively, speak clearly, and let her handle most of the talking. Remember, she said as we walked up the courthouse steps, they have to prove you're incompetent. We just have to prove you're not. And Margaret, you've never been more competent in your life. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. Owen sat at a table with his attorney, a sharp-faced man in an expensive suit who looked like he specialized in separating elderly people from their assets. Owen wouldn't make eye contact with me. Even when I walked past his table to sit with Rachel, he stared straight ahead like I was invisible. Lauren sat in the gallery behind him, wearing black like she was attending a funeral, which, in a way, she was. The funeral of any pretense that this family had ever truly loved me. Your Honor, Owen's attorney began, we're here today because of serious concerns about Mrs. Hayes' declining mental capacity and her vulnerability to exploitation by unscrupulous individuals who may be taking advantage of her confusion. Unscrupulous individuals. He was talking about Rachel, the woman who had protected me when my own son was trying to rob me. Mrs. Hayes has recently made several concerning decisions, the attorney continued. She's hired lawyers to challenge her family's attempts to help her. She's refused necessary medical evaluations. And she's begun making erratic financial choices that suggest impaired judgment. Erratic financial choices. Like buying myself clothes and cooking myself dinner. We have documentation showing that Mrs. Hayes recently spent over $600 on unnecessary luxury items, demonstrating a lack of understanding about appropriate financial priorities for someone of her age and income level. I wanted to stand up and scream that $600 was less than Owen had taken from me for a single dinner out, that I'd given him more money than that dozens of times without question. But Rachel squeezed my hand, reminding me to stay silent. Furthermore, the attorney said, Mrs. Hayes has become increasingly isolated and paranoid, refusing visits from family members and making accusations about their motives that have no basis in reality. No basis in reality. Except for the conversation I'd overheard where they'd discussed my death like a business opportunity. Then it was Rachel's turn. Your Honor, she said, standing with the confidence of someone who held all the cards, what we have here is not a case of diminished mental capacity, but a textbook example of attempted financial elder abuse. She placed a thick folder on the judge's bench. Dr. Patricia Williams conducted a comprehensive evaluation of Mrs. Hayes and found her to be completely mentally competent, with no signs of cognitive decline or impaired judgment. The concerning decisions that petitioners cite are actually evidence of Mrs. Hayes' excellent judgment. She recognized that family members were attempting to gain control of her assets through manipulation and fraud, and she took appropriate steps to protect herself. Rachel opened another folder. Mrs. Hayes has documentation showing years of financial exploitation by her son, requests for money that were never repaid, emotional manipulation designed to guilt her into providing financial support, and recently, attempts to pressure her into signing power of attorney documents that would have given him complete control over her assets. As for the claim that Mrs. Hayes spent $600 inappropriately, Your Honor, this is a woman worth nearly $10 million who bought herself clothing for the first time in a decade. If anything, her previous reluctance to spend money on herself while giving thousands to family members shows how successfully she was being manipulated. $10 million. I saw Owen's head snap toward his attorney, saw Lauren's mouth fall open in shock. They'd had no idea. Your Honor, Rachel continued, we're requesting that this petition be dismissed and that Mr. Owen Hayes be permanently barred from making any legal claims regarding his mother's mental capacity or financial affairs. The judge studied the documents for several minutes that felt like hours. Finally, he looked up. Mr. Hayes, he said, addressing Owen directly, do you have any documentation of your mother's alleged mental impairment beyond your own opinion and concerns? Owen's attorney shuffled through his papers. Your Honor, the family's observations of declining judgment? That's not what I asked. Do you have medical documentation, professional evaluations, anything beyond anecdotal claims? No, Your Honor, but… Mrs. Hayes, the judge said, turning to me, do you understand the nature of these proceedings? Yes, Your Honor, I said clearly. My son is trying to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can control my finances. And how do you feel about that? For a moment, I felt the weight of 73 years, 48 years of motherhood, decades of putting everyone else's needs before my own. Then I looked at Owen, sitting rigid in his chair, still unable to meet my eyes. I feel sad, I said honestly, sad that the child I loved more than my own life grew up to see me as nothing more than a bank account. But I'm not surprised. I taught him that my only value was in what I could give him. I made myself so available, so accommodating, so eager to sacrifice, that he learned to see me as a resource instead of a person. My voice grew stronger. But I'm done being used, Your Honor. I'm done apologizing for taking up space in my own life. I'm done being grateful for scraps of attention from people who only call when they need something. I turned to look directly at Owen for the first time since entering the courtroom. I raised you to be better than this. Owen's face had gone pale, but his expression remained hard, unrepentant. The judge made his decision quickly. This petition is dismissed. Mr. Hayes, any future attempts to challenge your mother's mental capacity without substantial medical evidence will be considered harassment and may result in restraining orders. He looked directly at Owen. Your mother appears to be thinking more clearly than she has in years. I suggest you respect her decisions and her boundaries. As we gathered our papers to leave, Owen finally stood and approached me. For a moment, I thought he might apologize, might show some glimmer of the boy I'd raised. Instead, he said, You've made a mistake, Mom. A big one. Don't come crying to us when you need help. The threat was clear. Cooperate or face abandonment. Owen, I said quietly, I've been alone for years. You just never noticed because I was still useful to you. I walked out of that courtroom with my head high, leaving behind the last remnants of the illusion that I was anything more to my son than a potential inheritance. In the courthouse parking lot, Rachel hugged me like we'd just won the lottery. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about it for a moment, taking inventory of my emotions. I felt sad, certainly, disappointed, angry at years of wasted love and misplaced trust. But underneath all of that, I felt something else. Free. For the first time in decades, I was completely, utterly free. Free from the obligation to fund someone else's lifestyle. Free from the guilt of saying no to unreasonable demands. Free from the exhausting effort of trying to buy love from people who had none to give. I feel like myself again, I told Rachel. For the first time in 48 years, I feel like myself. That night, I called Betty and accepted her invitation to lunch. Then I booked a cruise to Alaska I'd been dreaming about since Robert died. Then I opened a bottle of champagne, the good stuff, Dom Perignon that cost more than I used to spend on groceries in a month, and toasted the woman in the mirror. The The woman who had finally learned the difference between being loved and being used. The woman who had chosen herself. The cruise ship Northern Star pulled away from Seattle's harbor on a Tuesday morning in early November, carrying me away from everything I'd ever known and toward something I'd never dared to imagine. A life lived entirely for myself. I stood on the deck in my new winter coat, watching the city skyline shrink into the distance, and felt something I hadn't experienced since I was 17 years old. Pure, unlimited possibility. The woman standing beside me at the railing was nothing like the diminished, apologetic person who had sat in that courthouse just 2 weeks earlier. This woman wore confidence like jewelry, carried herself like someone who mattered, spoke to strangers without automatically apologizing for existing. This woman was me, the real me, the person I'd been before I learned that love meant sacrifice and motherhood meant erasure. My stateroom was small but elegant, with a window that looked out onto the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean. I'd upgraded to a balcony room at the last minute, not because I needed the luxury, but because I wanted it. Because for the first time in decades, wanting something was reason enough to have it. The first night at dinner, I was seated at a table with 3 other solo travelers. Patricia, a retired nurse from Portland whose husband had died the previous year. James, a widowed professor from Vancouver who was celebrating his 70th birthday. And Maria, a divorced librarian from San Francisco who had decided to take the trip she'd been planning with her ex-husband by herself. "So what brings you on this adventure?" Patricia asked me as we shared a bottle of wine that tasted like celebration. I paused, considering how to answer. The old Margaret would have given some self-deprecating response about being a lonely widow taking her first vacation. But the new Margaret, the real Margaret, told the truth. "I just won my freedom," I said simply, "and I'm learning how to use it." Over the next 7 days, I discovered parts of myself that had been dormant for so long I'd forgotten they existed. In Juneau, I took a helicopter tour over the Mendenhall Glacier, soaring above landscapes so beautiful they made me weep with joy. The old Margaret would never have spent $300 on something so frivolous. The new Margaret bought photographs from the pilot and displayed them in her stateroom like trophies. In Ketchikan, I walked through the Totem Pole Park and listened to a Native American guide tell stories about resilience, about carving beauty from hardship, about the strength that comes from honoring your own truth. When he spoke about the importance of cutting away what no longer serves you, I thought about Owen and felt not sadness, but gratitude for the lesson he'd unknowingly taught me. In Skagway, I rode the White Pass Railway through mountain passes that took my breath away, sharing a compartment with a young couple on their honeymoon who asked about my family. "I don't have children," I heard myself say, and realized it was the first time in 48 years that statement had felt like freedom rather than loss. But it was in the ship's library on the 4th day that I met Eleanor. She was 85 years old, tiny and fierce, with silver hair cut in a stylish bob and clothes that spoke of someone who had never apologized for taking up space. She was reading a book about investing in art, making notes in the margins with the focused attention of someone planning her next acquisition. "Excuse me," I said, settling into the chair beside her, "but I couldn't help noticing your book. Are you an art collector?" Eleanor looked up with eyes that sparkled with intelligence and mischief. "Darling, I'm whatever I want to be on any given day. Today I'm thinking about buying a Picasso. Yesterday I was considering learning Italian. Tomorrow I might take up skydiving." She closed her book and studied me with the frank assessment of someone who had lived too long to waste time on pretense. "You have the look of someone who's just discovered she exists. How long has it been since you made a decision based purely on what you wanted?" The question hit me like a revelation. "About 3 weeks," I admitted. "Well, congratulations. Most people never figure that out at all. What was the catalyst?" I found myself telling Eleanor everything. About Owen, about the years of financial manipulation, about the court case, about discovering that I was worth $10 million and had been living like I was worth nothing. Eleanor listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, her expression growing more approving with each detail. "Your son," she said finally, "sounds like a complete shit." I burst out laughing. Actual, genuine laughter that came from somewhere deep in my chest. "He really is. Good. It's important to call things what they are. Now, what are you going to do with all that lovely money and all that hard-earned wisdom? I don't know, I admitted. I've never thought about what I actually want. I've spent so many years thinking about what everyone else needed that I don't even know where to start. Eleanor smiled, and it was like watching the sunrise. Darling, that's the most exciting problem in the world to have. She leaned closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. Can I tell you a secret? I've been married 4 times. The first 3 husbands, I married because I thought I should, because they needed me, or because it was expected, or because I was afraid of being alone. What about the 4th? I married him because I wanted to, because he made me laugh and challenged me and never once asked me to be smaller than I was. We had 15 glorious years together before he died, and every single day was a choice I made for joy. She patted my hand with fingers that wore rings worth more than some people's houses. The difference between should and want is the difference between existing and living. You've been existing for 48 years. Now you get to learn how to live. That night, I stood on my balcony watching the aurora borealis paint the sky in impossible colors. The northern lights danced above the ship like nature's own celebration, and I felt something shift inside me, a fundamental realignment of how I saw myself and my place in the world. I wasn't Margaret the mother anymore, defined entirely by my relationship to someone who saw me as a resource. I wasn't Margaret the widow, forever mourning a past that was gone. I wasn't Margaret the victim, cowering under other people's expectations and demands. I was just Margaret, complete, whole, sufficient unto myself. The woman who had given birth to Owen and raised him with love was real, and that love had mattered, even if it hadn't been returned in kind. But I was so much more than that single relationship. I was a retired teacher who had shaped hundreds of young minds. I was a woman who had survived loss and betrayal and found the strength to rebuild. I was someone who had finally learned to distinguish between love and manipulation, between generosity and exploitation. I was free. When the ship docked back in Seattle, I didn't immediately book a flight home. Instead, I extended my trip, spending 3 days exploring the city like a tourist in my own life. I visited art galleries and bought a small watercolor that spoke to me, not because it was a good investment or because it matched my furniture, but because it made me smile. I ate at restaurants I'd only read about, ordering whatever sounded interesting without checking prices or calculating the cost per serving. I bought books, stacks of them, novels I'd been meaning to read for years, travel guides for places I'd always wanted to visit, memoirs by women who had reinvented themselves later in life. On my last evening in Seattle, I had dinner at a restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. As I sat at a table for one, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of gold and salmon, my phone rang. Owen's name appeared on the screen. For a moment, muscle memory almost made me answer. 48 years of conditioning screamed that when your child calls, you respond immediately, no matter what they've done to you. But then I looked around at the life I was building, a life filled with choices made for joy rather than obligation, and I let the call go to voicemail. Later, in my hotel room, I listened to the message. Mom, it's Owen. Look, I know things got heated between us, and maybe we both said things we didn't mean. Lauren and I have been talking, and we think maybe we can work something out. We're willing to let bygones be bygones if you are. Call me back. Willing to let bygones be bygones. As if attempting to steal my assets and having me declared mentally incompetent were just minor misunderstandings that could be smoothed over with a phone call. But what struck me most about the message wasn't its casual dismissal of what he'd tried to do to me. It was the tone, still entitled, still manipulative, still operating from the assumption that I existed primarily to serve his needs. He hadn't called to apologize. He'd called because something had changed in his calculations, and he wanted to renegotiate the terms of my exploitation. I deleted the voicemail without returning the call. Instead, I called Betty and invited her to join me on my next adventure. A month in Tuscany, staying at a villa I'd rented sight unseen because the photographs showed gardens that looked like paradise. Margaret, are you serious? Betty laughed. A month in Italy? At our age? Especially at our age, I said, looking out at the Seattle skyline twinkling in the darkness. Betty, I've just figured out that I'm going to die someday. And when that happens, I want to look back on a life that was actually mine. When do we leave? 2 weeks. Pack your appetite for adventure. As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the hotel room window. The woman looking back at me had silver hair that caught the lamplight, eyes that sparkled with anticipation, and a smile that belonged entirely to herself. She looked like someone who was finally ready to live. And for the first time in decades, I couldn't wait to find out what she was going to do next. 18 months later, I'm sitting in my garden in the hills of Tuscany, watching the sunset over vineyards that stretch toward infinity. The villa I bought, yes, bought, not rented, overlooks the valley below like a dream made of stone and possibility. The woman writing these words in her journal bears little resemblance to the frightened, diminished person who once sat in a Chicago courtroom defending her right to exist. This woman has sun-kissed skin from afternoons spent painting watercolors in olive groves. Her silver hair is shorter now, cut in an elegant style that frames a face that has learned to smile without asking permission. Her hands, once constantly wringing with anxiety, now move confidently across the page, recording a life that is finally, completely her own. Betty is here with me, of course. She arrived 6 months ago for what was supposed to be a 2-week visit, and simply never left. We've become what the locals call les Américains qui ridono sempre, the Americans who are always laughing, because we are. We laugh at the absurdity of discovering joy at 74 and 71. We laugh at our terrible Italian pronunciation. We laugh at the young Italian men who flirt with us at the market, apparently unaware that we're old enough to be their grandmothers and completely delighted by the attention. Yesterday, I received an email from my financial advisor in Chicago. My investments have grown to nearly $12 million, thanks to some excellent decisions I've made about renewable energy stocks and international markets. The old Margaret would have felt guilty about having so much money. This Margaret feels powerful, knowing she has choices. I've started a scholarship fund at Northwestern University, not in Owen's name, but in Robert's. It provides full tuition for women over 40 returning to school after raising children. The first recipient wrote me a letter that made me cry. Mrs. Hayes, you've given me the chance to remember who I am beyond being somebody's mother. I understand exactly what she means. 3 weeks ago, I got another call from Owen. This time I answered. Mom? His voice was different, smaller, uncertain. I heard you're living in Italy now. I am. I didn't elaborate. Didn't fill the silence with the explanations and reassurances that would have once flowed automatically from my mouth. Are you ever coming back? I don't know. Probably not permanently. I like my life here. A long pause. Mom, Lauren and I, things haven't been going well. The business, our marriage. I know I messed up with you. I know I hurt you. I was wondering if maybe we could talk. If maybe you could. Could what, Owen? I asked gently but firmly. Could forgive you? I already have. Could trust you? That would take time and evidence of change that I haven't seen. Could help you financially? No. That door is permanently closed. But Mom, I'm your son. Yes, you are. And I will always love the little boy you used to be, the child I raised and nurtured and sacrificed for. But that doesn't mean I have to enable the man you chose to become. I heard him breathing on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought he might say something real, something honest, something that acknowledged the damage he'd done and the changes he needed to make. Instead, he said, I hope you're happy with your decision. The old Margaret would have heard that as an accusation, would have felt guilty for prioritizing her own well-being over his comfort. This Margaret heard it as exactly what it was. A final attempt at manipulation from someone who had never learned any other way to relate to people. I am, I said simply. I'm happier than I've ever been in my life. After I hung up, I walked to my favorite spot in the garden, a stone bench beneath a centuries-old olive tree that has weathered storms and seasons beyond counting. I thought about the woman I used to be, the one who would have dropped everything to rescue Owen from whatever crisis he'd created for himself. I felt no temptation to become her again. That woman had been kind, but not wise, generous, but not discerning, loving, but not self-protective. She had confused enabling with caring, sacrifice with love, depletion with virtue. This woman, the one I am now, loves more wisely. She gives from abundance rather than emptiness. She has learned that the most profound act of love is sometimes the word no. Last month, I did something I never thought I'd do again. I fell in love. His name is Alessandro, and he's the most beautiful 76-year-old man I've ever seen. He's a retired professor of art history who moved to this village after his wife died 3 years ago. He has silver hair that curls at his collar, eyes the color of espresso, and hands that gesture when he talks about Caravaggio with the passion of someone half his age. We met at the local market when I was struggling to communicate with a vendor about tomatoes. Alessandro appeared at my elbow like a silver-haired angel, translating my broken Italian into something that made the vendor laugh and offer me the best produce in his stall. "Americana?" he asked in accented English. "Guilty as charged," I replied. "Ah, but you choose beautiful tomatoes. This shows excellent judgment." He walked me home that day, carrying my market bags and pointing out architectural details I'd never noticed. At my gate, he handed me my groceries and said, "Perhaps tomorrow you need help with the peppers, yes?" I laughed, at the transparent excuse. "Perhaps I do. We've been having coffee together every morning since. Not dates, exactly, but something more delicious than friendship and less complicated than romance. Alessandro treats me like a woman worth pursuing, worth impressing, worth the considerable charm he applies to every conversation. He knows about my past, about Owen, about the years I spent being diminished by people who should have cherished me. He listens to these stories with the expression of someone who cannot imagine treating any woman, let alone one he cares about, with such casual cruelty. In Italy, he told me just last week, we have a saying, "L'amor non ha età." Love has no age, but perhaps more important, respect has no expiration date. Alessandro asks for nothing from me except my company and my thoughts on everything from Renaissance art to the proper way to prepare risotto. He brings me books he thinks I'll enjoy, flowers from his garden, stories about his travels that make me want to see the world through his eyes. When he looks at me, he sees Margaret, not Owen's mother, not Robert's widow, not someone's opportunity or obligation, just me, interesting and valuable in my own right. I am, I realize, finally ready to be seen. This morning, as I write in my journal with Alessandro reading nearby and Betty humming while she tends to her herb garden, I find myself thinking about time, how much of it I wasted, how much I have left, how differently I want to spend the years remaining to me. I think about all the women like me, the mothers who have given everything, the wives who have accommodated themselves into invisibility, the daughters who have sacrificed their dreams to meet other people's expectations. I think about how many of us reach our 70s believing we have no choices left, no possibilities remaining, no right to want anything for ourselves. I want to tell them, it's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to say no to people who drain you and yes to experiences that fill you. It's never too late to discover that you are not, and never were, just a supporting character in someone else's story. It's never too late to stop apologizing for taking up space in your own life. The woman I was 18 months ago believed that love meant accepting whatever scraps of attention and affection others were willing to give her. She thought being a good mother meant enabling bad behavior indefinitely. She confused self-sacrifice with virtue and boundaries with selfishness. The woman I am now understands that true love, for others and for yourself, requires wisdom, discernment, and the courage to demand respect even from people you die for, especially from people you die for. As the last light fades over the Tuscan hills, I close my journal and walk into my house, my beautiful, chosen, deliberately created sanctuary, and prepare dinner for the people who see me as I truly am, complete, valuable, and worthy of love that doesn't require me to disappear. Tomorrow, Alessandro and I are driving to Florence to see a Botticelli exhibition. Betty is coming with us, of course, and she's bringing her camera to document what she calls Margaret's Italian Renaissance. That's exactly what this is. A renaissance, a rebirth, a rediscovering of everything I am beyond what I can give to other people. I am 74 years old, and I am finally, gloriously, unapologetically alive. And you know what? If this story sounds familiar to you, if you recognize yourself in the woman I used to be, I have something important to tell you. It's not too late. Whatever age you are, whatever circumstances have convinced you that your life is set in stone, whatever voices have told you that wanting more is selfish, they're wrong. You are not too old to choose happiness. You are not too late to demand respect. You are not wrong to want a life that feels like yours. Have you ever found yourself giving so much to others that you forgot you existed too? Have you ever loved someone who saw you as an opportunity rather than a person? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story, because stories like ours need to be told. They need to be heard by women who think their time for choices has passed. If this message resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe. Because maybe, just maybe, this story will reach someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to choose yourself. And that might be the most important thing any of us ever do.